Yesterday's prophecies, today's headlines. This is the Hal Lindsey Report. And now, Hal Lindsey.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hal Lindsey Report. The United States announced last week that it will stop funding the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA. That's the UN agency responsible for aid to Palestinian refugees. I reported a few weeks ago that 7 former U.S. Secretaries of State had publicly opposed this action. And that's when the U.S. was proposing to cut its contribution by only 50%. Now, we are stopping completely. The State Department correctly described the program as irredeemably flawed. A spokesman for Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called the decision an assault on the Palestinian people. Through the years, the United States gave more than $5 billion to UNRWA. That's billion with a B. Currently, the U.S. provides nearly 30% of UNRWA's program budget. The Palestinians did not thank Americans for their generosity. Instead, they said that by no longer sending this gift, the United States was assaulting them. But the truth is that as a protector of the status quo, UNRWA has been an enemy of the Palestinian people. UNRWA never sought a permanent solution to the Palestinian refugee problem. They never tried to get the people out of refugee camps and into mainstream society. That's because the camps serve a political purpose. They are a weapon to use against Israel. Somewhere along the line, UNRWA forgot the Palestinian refugees are people, not pawns in a PR game. In the entire 70 years of UNRWA's existence, they have never permanently settled a single refugee. UNRWA schools indoctrinate children to despise Israel. They encourage terrorism by praising terrorists, Nazis, and the annihilation of the Jews. And until last week, U.S. taxpayers paid the salaries of those teachers. Because the UN hires local Gazans, the UNRWA payroll is loaded with avowed Hamas terrorists. Their schools and hospitals are used to house missiles and missile launch platforms. The refugee camps are filthy, run down, and dangerous. UNRWA continues its mission at the expense of the people it is supposed to help. They don't want to solve the problem. That would mean the end of their existence. Germany says it will increase its contributions to UNRWA to help make up for the lost U.S. funding. But instead of promoting this long-running scam, Germany and the other nations should work to actually help Palestinian refugees get out of the refugee camps and into society. Sometime in the next 6 months, the Israeli Defense Forces, or IDF, will receive a new Chief of General Staff. The person who holds that position is also known as the Commander-in-Chief of the Israeli Defense Forces. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman has the task of recommending to the government who the next IDF chief should be. In July, he announced 4 finalists for the job. He now says he has made the choice, but as I record this program, he has not yet made the choice public. Above all else, you would expect everyone being considered for such a position to love and honor his country. But 2 of the 4 candidates illustrate a growing problem for Israel. Caroline Glick is the senior contributing editor for the Jerusalem Post. She recently wrote, "Today, the IDF General Staff is in open rebellion against the government and the citizens of Israel. Does that sound extreme? Well, one of the finalists is former Deputy Chief of Staff Major General Yair Galan. On Holocaust Remembrance Day in 2016, he sounded like a member of the anti-Israel BDS movement. That's the group that wants nations and companies to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. Standing in front of the Western Wall, he said, "If something frightens me in the memory of the Holocaust, it is identifying nauseating processes that unfolded in Europe generally and in Germany in particular back then, 70, 80, and 90 years ago, and finding evidence of them here among us today." Glick wrote, "Golan's speech was factually wrong. There is no evidence whatsoever that the Nazification of German society is repeating itself in Israel. But it isn't merely that he was wrong. The problem is that his statement was an anti-Semitic libel. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance is an organization with 31 member countries. That includes the United States and 24 EU member states. The Alliance presents what it calls a working definition of anti-Semitism. One part of the definition is drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazi. In other words, a man who could become the IDF commander-in-chief meets at least one part of the widely held definition of anti-Semitism. To be honest, I don't know how he kept his job after making such a statement. Later, he expressed surprise that his words had stirred up such a controversy, but he was very clear that he was standing by them. Despite his obvious scorn of the nation, he's sworn to defend many of his fellow generals, continue to stand with him, supporting him to become their next leader. Another finalist is Nitzan Alan, the former commander of the Operation Directorate. Glick writes, during his tour of duty as division commander in Judea and Samaria and his stint as commander Central Command, Alan built up a record of political agitation that involved demonizing the Israeli Jews who live in communities in Judea and Samaria and making light of the security threat emanating from the Palestinian Authority and from Hamas and PLO terrorist groups. In 2011, Palestinian terrorists brutally murdered a Jewish family of 5 as they slept in their beds. Alan attempted to justify the murders by implying they were a response to what are known as price tag incidents. These are mostly acts of vandalism committed by Jewish delinquents against both Palestinians and the IDF. The New York Times says they exact a price from local Palestinians or from Israeli security forces for any action taken against their settlements enterprise. So General Alon justified a major gruesome act of terror against Israelis by comparing it to the mischievous behavior of some small-time Jewish hoodlums. 2 weeks later, Palestinian security forces shot and killed an Israeli student as he and his friends left Joseph's tomb in Nablus. But Alon compared the Palestinians' action to something IDF troops would do in a similar situation. In response to that, Danny Dayan, then the head of the Council of Jewish Communities in Judea and Samaria, said, IDF soldiers do not empty magazines on unarmed civilians who do not endanger them as they exit a place of worship. Slandering IDF soldiers to whitewash Palestinian crimes is a severe moral failing. In a New York Times interview, Alon not only criticized his own government, but Israeli support in the U.S. Congress. These are only two of the four men in the running for IDF chief, and at this point, they appear to be the least likely of the four to get the job. Still, it's disconcerting that Israel's military leadership has been infected with such blatantly anti-Israel beliefs. It's okay to constructively criticize Israel's government or the Israeli people when they are wrong. But if you publicly state that Israel is turning into a fascist state, you shouldn't be in the IDF, much less leading it. Evangelical Christians who support Israel need to understand the spiritual warfare going on here. Satan's goal is to destroy Israel. If he cannot succeed from the outside, he will try to destroy it from within. Those of us who love God's Word often pray for Israel. We do that because we love Israel, but also because of a spiritual imperative. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper that love thee. It is often said that the first part of that verse is a prayer request from God, but it's really more of a prayer command. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. In part, that means pray for protection against any force that comes against Jerusalem's peace. It certainly includes the idea of praying for the IDF. The second half of the verse, they shall prosper that love thee, harkens back to God's promise to Abraham in Genesis 12:3. I will bless them that bless thee. We often apply that verse to nations, but it's also a promise to individuals, including you and me.
Hal Lindsey is pleased to present his latest teaching series, God's Outline of History. In this set of 13 audio compact discs, Hal Lindsey will guide you on a scriptural journey from the Garden of Eden to the Millennium and Last Judgment. You will learn how God views events here on earth. You can receive this informative and inspiring series of 13 audio CDs for only $49.99 plus shipping and handling. Order God's Outline of History by writing to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also order online at hallindsey.com or by phoning toll-free 1-888-RAPTURE. Order God's Outline of History today.
Last week, the nation bid farewell to Senator John McCain of Arizona. The various televised events and services include some powerful and moving moments, but it was also a week filled with blatantly overblown praise and stunning hypocrisy. As I watched, I wondered where all of this goodwill was when Senator McCain ran for president in 2008. In the endorsement of Barack Obama that year, the New York Times slammed McCain. Senator John McCain of Arizona has retreated farther and farther to the fringe of American politics, running a campaign on partisan division, class warfare, and even hints of racism. But after his death last week, the New York Times editorial board sang a different tune. Mr. McCain, through his willingness to tackle thorny and even politically toxic issues, gave hope for the future. His example still does. They wrote, Mr. McCain was a charming, imperfect man driven by a code of honor. From the man whom they said promoted class warfare and even hints of racism, he mysteriously became the man whose example gives hope for the future. The same media that could not say a nice word about McCain in 2008 were suddenly filled with gushing praise. But sadly, I think the real reason for their fervor in honoring McCain was not their love for him, but their hatred for someone else, and that came through too. On MSNBC, Steve Schmidt, John McCain's former campaign advisor, told Chris Matthews, "We see in public life today, Chris, a season of cowardice where so many people have forsworn their oaths that have become obedient in a cult of personality to a vile and objectionable leader who tramples on every sense of decency and every good virtue in the country." A little later, Schmidt had the audacity to say that the country needed a timeout from the poisonous partisanship that has divided us. That theme ran over and over. John McCain wanted America to come back together. America must have unity, but that unity must allow for abortion, open borders, socialism, and the ever-increasing levels of poverty and government dependence those policies entail. At the beginning of August, Business Insider reported on a poll showing John McCain as the third least popular member of the United States Senate. Yet, the media covered his death as if he had been a popular president. Not much honesty there. Despite my frustration with the breathless hyperbole of the week, I did appreciate some things about John McCain's life story. Grant Woods was McCain's former chief of staff. He told about his boss once describing what it was like to be in a North Vietnamese prison at Christmas. It was a Christmas Eve when the prisoners were allowed to celebrate. Woods recalled McCain saying, "We got together under this bare light bulb and we sang Christmas carols and we quoted Bible verses that we could remember. And we told the gospel story to each other. In a dire situation like that, Santa Claus and Jingle Bells Rock just don't cut it." When McCain attended Episcopal High School in Alexandria, Virginia, he was required to go to chapel every day. So in that dark place, despite his party boy past, McCain became the preacher. He had a remarkable memory for the liturgies he learned as a teenager. He was able to recite those words to his fellow POWs on that Christmas Eve night. John McCain's plane was shot down over North Vietnam on October 26, 1967. He was taken captive and placed in the infamous Hanoi Hilton prison camp. In July of 1968, his father, Admiral Jack McCain, assumed command of U.S. forces in the Pacific. At that point, the North Vietnamese offered John an early release. According to the military code of conduct, prisoners are to be released in the order they were captured. First man in, first man out. To his credit, McCain held firm to that code and refused their offer. The torture got worse. When you read a list of McCain injuries, it's amazing that he survived it all. He once credited that survival to his faith. Mr. Woods told another moving story the senator often shared. McCain had suffered a particularly long and grueling interrogation by his captors, but their torture wasn't working. In their anger, they tied him up with a rope and they tied it up miserably tight. Then they threw him back into his cell for the night. At about 10 p.m. that evening, a guard he had never seen before entered his cell. Without speaking a word, he loosened the rope, then left. Around 4 a.m. the next morning, the guard came back into the cell. Silently, he retightened the rope so that McCain would be found in the same condition in which he had been left by the interrogators the previous night. A few days later, Woods said, McCain was standing in the dirt yard and that guard just walked up next to him. That guard did not say a word, but with his sandal, he drew a cross in the dirt. And they looked at it for a minute, and then the guard rubbed it out and went on his way. He never saw that guard again. When McCain told the story, he would often say, for a minute there was just two Christians worshiping together. I'll never forget that moment. It would be a wonderful story if God had sent an angel to loosen McCain's rope. But I think this is an even better one. God sent a simple man, and in the face of the great personal danger, that man was faithful, compassionate, and encouraging. The message that God has given me is more important now than it's ever been, for the church and for the nation. That's why I'm asking you to help me to expand our reach.
To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.
And thanks for being a vital part of my team. The relationship between Jesus and his disciples is a profound one. Sometimes we confuse disciple with apostle. We think, yes, the Lord had a special relationship with Peter, James, John, and other disciples. But the phrase, the other disciples, encompasses all who have accepted him. I hope that includes you. Jesus is our intercessor. He prays for us just like he prayed for them. In Luke 22, the Lord said to Simon Peter, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail, and you, when once you have turned again, strengthen your brothers. In the same way, he interceded for Peter. Jesus intercedes for you. Hebrews 7 says, he is able to save forever those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. For it was fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, undefiled, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. That's a wonderful Old Testament picture of Christ's intercessory work for believers. He bears our names upon his heart as he continually represents us before the Father. We're taught this in the Old Testament from the practice of the high priest. He would go into the tabernacle before the presence of the Lord, before the ark as it was called, and would burn incense, which was a picture of prayer. Bound over his heart was a special vest with precious stones upon it. On each stone were written the names of the children of Israel. God said, and Aaron shall carry the names of the sons of Israel over his heart when he enters the holy place for a memorial before the Lord continually. This is a beautiful picture of Jesus Christ continually before the throne of God with your name on his heart. Hebrews 7 says, but he, on the other hand, because he abides forever, holds his priesthood permanently. Hence, also, he is able to save forever those who draw near to God through him, since he always lived to make intercession for them. Forever is a very long time. Jesus promised, I will never desert you, nor will I ever forsake you. Thank God that he always lives to make intercession for us. Because of that, we can draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and may find grace to help in time of need. He is our high priest. He is the only interface we need between God and ourselves. But the fact that his redemption allows us to communicate directly with God tells us something else, something amazing. We are priests too. Revelation chapter 1 verses 6 says, "He has made us a kingdom of priests for God, his Father." In practical terms, what does that mean? It means we can go directly to God on behalf of others. 1 Timothy chapter 2 verse 1 says, "I urge that entreaties and prayers, petitions and thanksgivings be made on behalf of all men." A priest's job is to represent men before God and to speak to men on God's behalf. Every believer has this tremendous privilege. 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 9 says, "You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own possession, that you may proclaim the excellences of him who has called you out of the darkness into his marvelous light." Not only has Jesus redeemed us from our sins and our eternal damnation, but he has called us friend and brought us into priestly fellowship with him. What grace, mercy, and favor. Well, that's it for tonight, folks. God willing, I'll see you next week.
You've been watching the Hal Lindsey Report. To support this program, send your tax-deductible gift to Hal Lindsey Media Ministries, P.O. Box 470470, Tulsa, Oklahoma 74147. You can also support this ministry online. Visit hallindsey.com or call 1-888-RAPTURE.